All right, now bear with me here because I'm pretty sure you're going to think I'm joking when I say the Purge series has finally reached its potential and is kind of valid for being on the screen after all these years.
I don't know what to say.
Since its inception, the Purge series has been this kind of weird outlier in the horror genre. For one thing, it doesn't really seem to fit in the horror genre. With the exception of the first film, most of the movies are predominantly action thrillers with a lot of gun violence and thrown in jump scares as sort of a desperate attempt to remind you, oh yeah, I came to see a horror film. And just as unsure as they are about their genre, they seem to be very unsure about what it is these films are trying to convey. For one thing, whether or not the films are endorsing or are criticizing the eponymous purge at the core of the entire series' premise. And one of the frustrating things about that is that when the films have something to say, they can be relatively effective, although they often seem like they're ham fisted and never quite reaching the point that they aspire to. And when they're not as good, when the plots are kind of just there for gore's sake or trying to be action filled, it really seems to insult the lofty premise that I think actually can be very engaging. With the Forever Purge, the series finally actually has a topic that's suited to the absurdity of its storyline, and in many ways uses this to catapult itself into relevance, finding dimensionality where before the films could be two-dimensional. They now feel fleshed out, the characters feel interesting, the settings and the set pieces seem to make sense, and that action thriller motif is much more bold in this movie, but it seems to fit, whereas before it just seemed like a confusing hodgepodge of genre tropes. Now, before we get into where we are now, we have to look at from whence we came, right? This might be hard to believe, but the first Purge movie came out only 8 years ago, which means this is the fifth film in 8 years for a pace that could only be described as Saw-esque. Now, The Purge started in a very simplistic and kind of grounded story following Ethan Hawke, who was sort of a security engineer professional who was selling security apparatus to people who were looking to stay safe from the Purge. And if you've been living under a rock and clicked this link by accident and need help, leave a comment and we can see if we can get emergency services to you. But The Purge is a 12-hour event that happens every year, started by the new founding fathers in the Purge lore, which is a dystopian political group that wanted to have a night where essentially all crimes are legalized. And invariably, this means that people in masks, because if things are legal, gotta hide your face, basically roving around and tormenting protagonists. And the first film, he had Ethan Hawke and his family who were being tormented by the people he had raked over the coals and sold these apparatus to and taken their money. And it was kind of a commentary about how we make money as a society off of the fears of the masses. And while a somewhat interesting concept, it really didn't live up to the lofty premise. Although it did better than the sequels, which were invariably just this snowball effect that we see so many horror films fall victim to, where essentially each sequel has to be bigger and bolder than the last. And in a series like this, that can be used to great effect, but it really wasn't. The series seemed to kind of steer away from this snowballing effect by going to a prequel for the fourth film, the aptly titled First Purge, which was about the first Purge. Now, this movie did something that I thought was really interesting, although it kind of failed in its attempt to execute, and that was really trying to usher and prioritize the political commentary that had always been so dormant in the genealogy of the Purge franchise. In this case, the first Purge really tries to explore how this came to be, and as should not be surprising, the new founding fathers instituted the Purge and particularly oppressed and continued to subjugate minorities in New York. So the commentary here just sort of being this racial inequity that I think delved more directly with social commentary than the first few films did. With the Forever Purge, it seemed as if the series had a predictable return to the contemporary timeline, getting back into something that would be a sequel to number 3, that seems to be doing what a lot of movies are doing now, like the new Rambo, where now we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to take it to Mexico. From the trailers and on its face, the story seems kind of basic and bland, but the execution was anything but. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still the Purge franchise. I mean, nothing here can be mistaken for Citizen Kane, although it's certainly better than Mank was. Nevertheless, the Forever Purge starts out with more interesting characters and characterization than probably any film in the franchise. And I think a big part of this is that the film itself is such an obvious, as they all are, elephant in the room social commentary about a variety of things, from the previous administration to the insurrection this year to just our growing divide in the country along political and other lines. And while this is the most obvious kind of issue to be tackling right now, and I doubt the first or last film to be addressing these topics, this is something that seems tailor-suited for the cynical and absurd universe The Purge exists within. And in some ways, the boldness and obviousness of the topic is very suited for the sometimes ham-fisted approach The Purge takes to addressing topics. Gone are the subtleties of the first few films about social inequity or economic inequality. This film is a very obvious political statement. And in doing so, it kind of frees itself up to some obvious tropes that are obvious from the perspective of the archetypes that they're writing from, right? So for instance, if you're looking at something that is Red Hat-esque, you're going to be looking at a border wall, which the film institutes. You're going to be looking at undocumented migration, which the film, in many ways, grounds our characters around. So from there, when you've got these general principles, you've got archetypes of characters that the writers can begin from and either lazily coast along with, as many films would do, or in this case, characters that the writers still took time trying to flesh out. In this case, you've got your main protagonists, Juan and Adela, who are two undocumented migrants from Mexico who are in Texas trying to find the American dream. Juan working for veteran actor Will Patton and his son, played by Josh Lucas, as the Purge is still an ongoing threat, having been reinstituted after the events in the third film. Now, unlike in the previous film, we begin to see a little bit more of how the least well-off in society are able to cope with this threat. In this case, they take whatever money they've been able to accrue, and the couple goes to sort of a mercenary outpost in Texas where soldiers will kind of guard them in this compound while the Purge is going on outside. Now, as they're kind of sitting here in this squalor, you have Will Patton's family, sort of like Ethan Hawke's in the first film, living in this ranch compound without a care in the world. Now, where the film gets interesting is that once the sirens go off and the Purge ends, as the title suggests, the Purge does not in fact end. And while this seemed to always be the inevitable conclusion of the Purge story, and I think was always a concern of people looking at, the philosophy behind the Purge, that you can't really put the Purge back in the box once you let ordinary people go out and commit horrible crimes, whatever they want to do with government sanctioning. The film uses this principle to drive characterization while sort of this anarchy is beginning to unfold in the United States. What I really want to focus on, however, is the style in which the movie approaches the subject matter. Josh Lucas and his family are sort of attacked by the poorly paid labor that they utilize at their ranch. Juan and Adela are attacked by essentially racists, people who look like they're missing their hats that might be red. And throughout the film, you begin to just experience these people who would like to enforce this system of anarchy, which all seems to have a particular political slant. The examples they use are sometimes subtle, often very much in your face and obvious, but what it does is it creates antagonists where you can immediately kind of understand them because they're so familiar and they're so real. They're no longer just people in masks who are, roaming around at night trying to stab whatever boring character of the week the series is introducing. These are people that we can not relate to, but certainly understand. And from there, we don't need to have, and the script doesn't attempt to utilize, so much exposition or sort of tedious getting to know the villains. This is really a story, a survival story, about your protagonists trying to escape from the world the Purge has created. And one thing that's interesting about this is, by showing the downfall of the Purge system and of our American, democratic system, you can really start to see decisions that are made in the canon of the universe that adds some dimensionality to things like the new founding fathers who are now forced to face what they have created, and they do, sending in the National Guard to fight with the Purgers, which, at least while still not making them anything other than evil, makes you think about the idea that, look, maybe in their own naivete, maybe they did think there was some capacity for good in the concept of the Purge that has now gotten out of control. While misplaced and stupid, it at least allows for you to have some empathy with that organization, whereas in the past they were just like umbrella corporation. Just every decision that could be evil, they'll pick that decision. So in this way, the movie tackles a topic that is well suited to this universe, gives us characters we can root for and care if they live or die, while telling us a story that fleshes out the canon, feels timely, and while certainly not profound in addressing the problems facing us as a society today, does give us an interesting tale of not just survival, but we as a people having to make a decision of either succumbing to fear and anger or trying to stay strong and figuring out what we do in the face of that danger and that anger and rage to move forward and forge a better society. And damn it, that sounds almost profound for a Purge film. And I would conclude and just say this. I honestly think if this weren't the fifth Purge movie, that it would actually be seen as a much better movie and likely be seen as at least decent social commentary. So if you think any of that sounds interesting, if you kind of like an action thriller, if you gave up on the Purge series and you're not sure whether to go back or not, if you like Josh Lucas and the majority of the cast from American Psycho, which we'll be doing a video about here in a couple weeks, you should go check out the Forever Purge, because I'm willing to bet this is the peak of the series, and I'll inevitably be back here in 2 years disappointed by whatever shit comes out in the sixth.
Well, hey there. If you enjoyed this review, make sure to let us know by liking and subscribing so we can make sure you see our new videos in the future. In the meantime, why not go check out some of our other reviews, or some of our original content like Cold Flights, or the story of Russian director Larissa Shapitka. It ain't gonna hurt nothing. Go ahead. Please? Alright, have a good day.